What if the future they imagined wasn't a fantasy but a warning? In the early 1990 seconds, as Hollywood bathed in the glow of rising budgets and global stardom, something stranger was happening on the fringes. Away from the studio lights and the glossy premieres, a handful of low-budget action films dared to ask questions the industry didn't want to hear. What if memory could be rewritten? What if heroes were reprogrammed by the very governments they swore to protect? What if the battle wasn't between good and evil, but between reality and the machine? These weren't polished Oscar hopefuls. These were scrappy, often ridiculed, sometimes forgotten films, but behind the cheap sets and synthetic soundtracks, they hid something raw, something unsettling. A version of truth too unstable for theaters, too loud to be left intact, and too real to be left remembered. These aren't just action movies. They're reflections of fears we never resolved, of technologies we unleashed too soon, and men we abandoned after the credits rolled. These are the 5 films that revealed what Hollywood tried to hide. Because in its chaotic, gender-bending, reality-melting mess, the film whispered something dangerous. That the future wouldn't be won by muscle or machines, but by whoever could rewrite the code of what it means to be human. But that's what makes it matter. Released in 1991 and directed by Franz Nell, American Kickboxer was meant to be a clean-cut martial arts drama, riding on the popularity of tournament-style action films like Bloodsport and Kickboxer. Starring John Barrett as B.J. Quinn, a fallen champion seeking redemption, the film offered audiences the familiar beats of revenge, glory, and redemption. Yet even in its title, something felt off. Despite what many believe, American Kickboxer is not part of the more widely known American Kickboxer 2 franchise. In fact, they share no plot, no actors, no creative team. It was a marketing trick, a title engineered to latch on to whatever wave was trending. This confusion alone doomed the film's identity before it ever had a chance. On the surface, it's just another action flick. But behind the scenes, it was a bruised production marked by cultural displacement. Shot in apartheid-era South Africa but set in the US, the film was edited to hide its true location, yet the tension bled through. The crowd, reactions, the landscapes, even the lighting, all hinted at a reality the film wasn't allowed to admit. And within its story, there's a brutal irony. A fighter punished not by his opponents, but by his own fame, pride, and the system built around him. American Kickboxer is a film about image, a title that lies, a setting that's masked, and a protagonist trying to reclaim the man behind the myth. It's not just about fists or footwork, it's about the quiet exile that comes after your final fight. And in that silence, the truth lingers. Film 2 Hologram Man, 1995. They digitized evil and lost control of the code. Released in 1995 and directed by Richard Pepin, Hologram Man had all the markings of a straight-to-video sci-fi action flick. With Joe Lara playing the heroic agent/Gallagher, yes, really, and Evan Lurie as the villainous Sean Lazarus, the film imagined a near-future dystopia where criminals could be stored as holograms only to escape their digital prisons, more dangerous than ever. To most viewers, it was a cheap Demolition Man knockoff. The graphics were crude, the dialogue stilted, and the plot borderline absurd. Critics dismissed it instantly, but look closer and Hologram Man becomes something else entirely. It wasn't just imitating better films. It was predicting a world we now recognize. Surveillance states, synthetic identities, and the terrifying question of what happens when digital versions of ourselves outlive us. Behind the film's neon explosions and metallic one-liners was a quiet production rebellion. The screenplay had originally leaned harder into satire, mocking state propaganda, and corporate weaponization of consciousness. But that script was cut. What remained was a shell wrapped in explosions, but still echoing a strange truth. Even its villain, Lazarus, speaks like a twisted prophet. I am the new flesh, I am information. He isn't just threatening cities, he's threatening the very idea of human identity in an age of replication. In 1995, that was science fiction. Now, it feels like memory. Hologram Man failed by every standard of mainstream success. But in the margins, it captured the exact fear we now live with. That data doesn't die, it escapes. And sometimes, it comes back to rewrite us. Hologram Man failed by every standard of mainstream success. But in the margins, it captured the exact fear we now live with. That data doesn't die, it escapes. And sometimes, it comes back to rewrite us. Even its villain, Lazarus, speaks like a twisted prophet. I am the new flesh, I am information. He isn't just threatening cities, he's threatening the very idea of human identity in an age of replication. In 1995, that was science fiction. Now, it feels like memory. Double Team, released in 1997 and directed by Hong Kong action stylist Tsui Hark, was supposed to be a global collision. East meets West, martial arts meets neon bombast. It starred Jean-Claude Van Damme at the tail end of his Hollywood stardom, basketball legend Dennis Rodman at the height of his tabloid fame, and a young Mickey Rourke sculpted into something closer to a myth than a man. To most, it's remembered, if at all, as a cinematic punchline. Flaming tigers, exploding coliseums, and techno dialogue that made critics cringe. The film was mocked for its excess, nominated for Razzies, and labeled one of Van Damme's worst. But beneath the chaos was a silent experiment gone wrong. The original cut of Double Team was reportedly darker, more meditative. Van Damme's character, Jack Quinn, wasn't just a disgraced agent. He was meant to represent a soldier erased by the very institutions he defended. The Colony, a high-tech prison for failed operatives, was conceived as a metaphor for memory black sites, places where dangerous men were stored. Not for justice, but for silence. That entire subtext was buried under jokes, explosions, and Rodman's sunglasses. Tsui Hark, a master of emotional action cinema in Asia, fought to keep the film's philosophical undertones intact. But the studio wanted American energy, not introspection. What emerged was a hybrid, so unstable, it collapsed under its own ambition. Yet in the wreckage, something haunting remains. A film where the hero is exiled not because he failed, but because he knew too much. A villain sculpted in pain. And a finale that burns so brightly, it tries to erase everything that came before. Double Team wasn't just a failure, it was a warning that when cinema chases noise over nuance, even truth gets blown apart. Film 4 Nemesis, 1992. The original cut of Double Team was reportedly darker, more meditative. Van Damme's character, Jack Quinn, wasn't just a disgraced agent. He was meant to represent a soldier erased by the very institutions he defended. The Colony, a high-tech prison for failed operatives, was conceived as a metaphor for memory black sites, places where dangerous men were stored. Not for justice, but for silence. That entire subtext was buried under jokes, explosions, and Rodman's sunglasses. In 1992, director Albert Pyun released Nemesis, a gritty cyberpunk thriller that walked the razor's edge between visionary and forgotten. Starring Olivier Gruner as Alex Rain, a cyborg agent questioning his programming, the film explored a fractured future where identity is engineered, loyalty is synthetic, and rebellion is coded into your bones. While Nemesis was dismissed by many as a Terminator derivative, it found cult resonance in late-night VHS circles. With its low-budget aesthetics, handheld cinematography, and explosive set pieces, it seemed to belong in the same scrapyard as countless other 90-second sci-fi relics. But what critics didn't see or chose to ignore was how prophetic it truly was. Behind the chaos lay a director at war with his own industry. Pyun envisioned Nemesis as the beginning of a bleak, poetic arc, a descent into a future ruled not by machines, but by people who forgot they were human. But his vision was cut to pieces. The studio demanded more action, less ambiguity. Entire character arcs were removed. Multiple sequels were churned out with diminishing returns, muddying what was once meant to be a singular scream against technological erasure. And yet, what remains of Nemesis still pulses with fear. Not fear of machines, but of the gray space in between, where man and code blur, where memory is no longer trusted, where the soul is a subroutine easily overwritten. Alex Rain isn't a hero, he's a placeholder, a warning that in the wrong hands, even a revolution can be recycled. Nemesis wasn't just ahead of its time, it was already mourning what we would become. Film 5 Timebomb, 1991. What if the man you've always been was just the weapon they forgot to detonate? Directed by Avi Nesher and released in 1991, Timebomb is one of the most quietly unsettling action thrillers of its decade. Starring Michael Biehn, still haunted by his roles in The Terminator and Aliens, the film follows Eddie Kay, a mild-mannered watchmaker whose life unravels when he begins to experience terrifying flashes of violence he can't explain. As it turns out, he was never really Eddie. He was a reprogrammed assassin activated, then abandoned. To the casual viewer, Timebomb looks like just another mid-tier psychological actioner. Explosions, chases, identity crises. But deep within its muted visuals and stripped-down storytelling is a brutal question. How much of you is really you? The film was barely marketed. Released with little fanfare and drowned in a sea of bigger, louder blockbusters, it never had a chance to resonate. But Timebomb wasn't trying to entertain. It was trying to confess. Beneath its plot-driven structure was an eerily quiet scream about trauma, government erasure, and the cost of programming violence into human bodies like software. Michael Biehn's performance is restrained, tired, almost too internalized for action cinema. And that's what makes it feel real. His breakdowns are not just narrative devices, they're echoes of a man catching glimpses of what he was trained to forget. No twist, no glory, just a question that lingers longer than any explosion. If your memories aren't yours, is your guilt still real? Timebomb didn't fail because it was bad. It failed because it told a truth Hollywood didn't want. That some wars don't need bombs, just broken men, pointed in the right direction. Bonus fact: the final program, 1973, long before cyberpunk had a name, before Blade Runner rewired noir with neon, there was the final program, a film so strange, so fractured, that it barely made it out alive. Directed by Robert Fuest and based on Michael Moorcock's dystopian novel, the 1973 film follows Jerry Cornelius, a scientist, playboy anti-hero navigating a world on the brink of collapse. His mission? To help create the perfect human by merging man and woman into a single being, a genderless, post-human savior. The result is not transcendence, but a creature that devours identity and laughs in the face of design. The film was released. Barely. Studios didn't know how to market it. Audiences didn't know how to absorb it. Critics were split between bafflement and disgust. The ending, both psychedelic and nihilistic, was considered too bleak, too confusing, too prophetic. What makes the final program so vital to this list isn't just its age or ambition, it's that it was allowed to exist, once, and then buried. The negatives were nearly lost. The edits butchered. Moorcock himself disowned it, calling it a betrayal of his vision. But that's what makes it matter. Because in its chaotic, gender-bending, reality-melting mess, the film whispered something dangerous. That the future wouldn't be won by muscle or machines, but by whoever could rewrite the code of what it means to be human. Some films fail on screen, others were never even allowed to fail. In the early 1990 seconds, as Hollywood bathed in the glow of rising budgets and global stardom, something stranger was happening on the fringes. Away from the studio lights and the glossy premieres, a handful of low-budget action films dared to ask questions the industry didn't want to hear. What if memory could be rewritten? What if heroes were reprogrammed by the very governments they swore to protect? What if the battle wasn't between good and evil, but between reality and the machine? These weren't polished Oscar hopefuls. These were scrappy, often ridiculed, sometimes forgotten films, but behind the cheap sets and synthetic soundtracks, they hid something raw, something unsettling. A version of truth too unstable for theaters, too loud to be left intact, and too real to be left remembered. And that's the paradox of these films. They were dismissed for being too loud, too cheap, too ridiculous. But maybe that's exactly what made them dangerous. Because under the noise, they said what prestige cinema wouldn't: that control wears many faces. That memory is a weapon. And that the future doesn't arrive with a whisper, it crashes through the screen, already too late. Which of these films do you think revealed too much? And which one deserved to be seen uncensored? Real secrets, where the truth was always in the edit.